Young black.
Young black.
A young black.
Black.
Black equestrian.
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 black equestrian.
Equestrian.
Black equestrian.
Equestrian.
Black equestrian.
I'm a young black equestrian.
I am a young black equestrian.
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Young Black Equestrians with your host, Abriana Johnson. Today, I wanted to throw it back just a little bit, back to 2020, when we first held the Diversity on Horseback virtual conference. This is something that I've been thinking about for quite some time, bringing it back. Life was a little crazy in 2021, so we didn't host it last year. But ever since I came up with the idea of this conference and put everything together, I really love the turnout the first year. And I am excited to bring it back this year in 2022. So this has been the surprise that I have been holding in for quite some time, but I have finally gotten some dates down. It is going to be such a celebration, and I'm excited to share it with y'all. More details will be coming out very soon, but the dates are March 11th and 12th for the Diversity on Horseback virtual conference. So I'm super excited for that for this year. I will send out details to the email list first because we can only have a limited amount of guests. So if you are on the YBE email list, then you will be the first to know about when the tickets go live and all the additional information for the Diversity on Horseback conference. But in this episode today, what you are listening to today is from the very first Diversity on Horseback conference. And it was a panel form or a Zoom group form. And the speakers, we had 3 speakers. The first speaker was a mental health professional, and she talked to us about getting grounded and expressing ourselves and really learning how to look at our identity and be confident in that. The second speaker was Brittany Chambers, very good friend of mine, owner of CBC Therapeutic Horseback Riding Academy. And she talked about how to develop that relationship with your trainer at in a barn environment and how to really connect in those types of situations. And then we talked with Nahshon Cook, who really talked about how to connect with your horse and how to really be able to feel what is happening, understand it and what that means for you, and then make a request in your, relationship with your horse while you're riding or while you're on the ground. So it was a really, really powerful event. People had a lot of good takeaways from that event. So I am bringing it back this year with all new guests, a little bit of a different format, but all the more transformational despite. So next, you are going to hear the recording from Nahshon's day at the Diversity on Horseback conference in 2020. And I really hope that you enjoy. Apologize ahead of time if the audio is a little bit different. Obviously, it was a older Zoom conversation, And I believe some people joined via phone. So thank you so much for tuning into this episode today. Again, remember to make sure you're on the email list so you're the first to know when the tickets go up. It is going to be free, but you still have to register. So make sure you go to youngblackequestrians.com and put your email in the email box so you're one of the first people to know when those tickets go live. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player as well as over on YouTube. And I will see you next week. Welcome, everybody, to day 3 of the Diversity on Horseback Equestrian Mental Health and Mindset Clinic. This is our 3rd day. On the first day, if you missed it, we spoke with Brittany Chambers, who is there, she's waving, about communication, the dynamics of communication. And we went over 3 of the different dynamics: horse and rider, trainer and student, and then horse to rider. Yeah. So that was pretty cool. We learned, how to effectively communicate there and how to effectively communicate any distress or anxiety that you have with your trainer and work through it with your horse. Yesterday, we spoke with Ashley Nash. She is a mental health professional that talked to us about clarity and some different exercises we could use and different ways to kind of cope with the anxieties we may have developed from different situations on horseback or with horses. So we ended that session coming up with mantras for ourselves, kind of either in our daily lives or right before we go riding, to kind of make it so that we have the best ride that we can possibly have. So today we have Nahshon Cook with us to talk about connection. And I'm so excited to have him here with us today. So welcome, Nahshon.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if you would, just go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody and kind of give us a little bit of background before you get started.
Sure. So my name is Nahshon Cook. I'm a dressage trainer and a practitioner of horsemanship. I am a teacher. I'm learning to be a businessman. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I just didn't want to interrupt.
Okay. Yeah. And so that's basically my spiel. I've taught in a few places around the world as a coach and a horse trainer and a competitor. I've taught in Asia and Europe, in the United States, and now my family owns a small horse farm here in Parker, Colorado, where I'm based out of. Yep.
Well, that is super awesome. And if you haven't already, after this, you can check out Nahshon's episode that we have on Young Black Equestrians, the podcast. It is a very, very interesting episode, and you get to learn a little bit more about him and his journey and, how he got to where he is today. So thank you so much for coming, Nahshon. I will go ahead and give you the floor.
Thank you for having me. And also, if you could just time,
yeah,
just so that the questions that want to come in can. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to riff off of, off of connection. With connection, I'm going to kind of riff off of Brittany's the communication between the trainer and the student, the communication between the rider and the horse, and the communication between the trainer and the horse, because there's a really big, beautiful circle there. I think that a lot of I think people's questions with their horses lay a lot in what their purposes in riding are, what their goals in riding are. I think that people come to horses for many different situations and reasons. Some comes through it for their therapy. Some people come to it for sport. Some people come to it for pleasure. For me, I look at it as the riding part as a general piece of taking care of them in the practice of horse husbandry. So, I think that the majority of the work that we come to, the majority of the work that we do with our horses is not when we ride. It's when we are caring for them and loving them and spending time with them and earning their trust by their care, by caring for them, and with training being a part of that care. So that is kind of how I look at it. I think that as a teacher, I see huge amounts of anxiety with a lot of horse people, with a lot of riders, and there is a Dutch dressage master named Bent Brandrup, and in his book, The Academic Art of Riding, in his epilogue, is "My horse is my mirror, which shows my good and my bad moods unmodified. Look into the eyes of your horse, but don't be afraid to see the truth in them. Who are you in the eyes of your horse?" And I think when that is where my connection comes from. I strive as a horseman and a teacher, and I try and impart this to my students, that whenever your horse sees you, they should always expect good things, right? And I think that culturally we have built an idea of horses in service of people, but I like to flip that around, and I think that when we serve our horses, when I serve my horses in my care, when I serve their people in the best way possible, or people who come in trailer in, my love for my work is expressed in my love and respect for them and how I teach and the considerations that are taken. And so I think that for students under the tutelage of a trainer, I think that a trainer or a teacher has a huge responsibility in setting an example as to how correct behavior around horses can lead to really, really wonderful performance results. So I think I work with horses that a lot of people have trouble with. So my personal horses are rescue horses from the kill pen. One of them is a high school horse, Nova, and then I have my two younger ones, and then my brother has one, and I think, and all of these horses have ended up in my care because people didn't hear them, right? And I think that being successful in your relationship with horses, whatever it is, it's a change of it's kind of a switching off of thinking as speaking and kind of turning on thinking as listening, because horses, they speak very, very clearly, and very, very precisely. They communicate very clearly and very precisely in ways that we first learn to observe when we begin to work with them, and then as time goes on, you begin to feel this. You begin to feel them, and you begin to trust their feelings. The feelings that you get about certain horses. Sometimes for me, they work in images. I can have a dream about a training problem, and the answer comes in a dream, and I go to my barn, and that answer is the right one, and we're able to move on in the training process. And when I present this idea sometimes to people in lessons and clinics, like, a lot of people come with a whole lot of disbelief that we can get so much from the work with our horses by first observing the breath, right? I think Brittany talked about mindfulness, observing the breath, focusing on something to help the anxiety go away. Once that practice, using the technique of mindfulness meditation in the saddle or in hand or whatever it is when you're working your horse, using that technique, once you move past that, there's a school of meditation called Vipassana, where you begin to feel you begin to feel tension in your body, and instead of trying to get rid of the tension, you focus on it and you see what is there. You see what emotions you're finding in this space and time, in this moment with your horse, and you then from the exploration of emotions, you begin to see what thoughts are triggered by these feelings. And if we go back to Brandrup's idea of horses being our mirrors, when we are tense in a certain situation and we expect horses to spook in the corners 9 times out of 10, they do. And so, it's just becoming aware of the body, aware of the breath, aware of the space and time that you're in, and creating the space, opening the door for that you want the horse to walk through, right? If at any moment, caveat here, pause, if at any moment anybody has a question, or Abriana, or you all have questions, please feel free to interrupt me and ask them to kind of just guide me, because sometimes my mind just riffs.
Okay.
So is this making sense so far?
Yeah, it definitely is, and it definitely ties into what we spoke about over the last 2 days. So yes, 100%.
I think that one of the biggest issues to accomplishment of goals in riding is fear, right? I think that's one of the biggest things. And one thing that one thing about fear that is really important to understand is that it's a learned thing, and that when we are afraid and we are working with our horses, there are walls, impenetrable walls, that are put up that doesn't allow us to move. And I have found that instead of trying to push people through, I have a student who has a ritual with her and her horse that they go through. They lunge for a bit, and then they walk around and do in-hand work, and then they have this treat ritual that they go through when she's on the mounting block and getting ready to mount. And I've found that when I allow that to happen, the work, the actual lesson is absolutely brilliant, because she has begun to identify where she is locked in her body, where she's locked in her mind, and been able to stay in a safe space for her and her horse to work through and process this. So I think that it's important as a teacher and helping people develop a true connection with their horses. One, validate what they're feeling. And when you validate what someone is feeling, you are being courageous enough to say that, you know, what I see may not be the correct thing about this situation, or that, you know, this lesson really isn't about me, but it's about them, and setting goals aside that you have for them, and starting where they're at. You know, I think that these are all really, really, really important. These are really, really important things to keep in mind when working with people, from a teacher perspective, from a trainer perspective, in my relationship with horses. I love spending time with them. I love taking care of them. I love observing them, and I love understanding now more and more that, you know, a lot of the issues that happen in work are usually not because of work, right? So it's really important as a trainer of horses to develop an eye for observation, and spending time with the horses to see how they behave. So I have a horse, Mohawk, who I found out had qualified for the Breeders' Cup. And she, you know, when she was young, before she ended up in the kill pen, she qualified for the Breeders' Cup. And in the springtime and the summer, she rubs her tail out. She rubs her butt. She was wormed. The vet couldn't figure out why this was happening, and there was just this particular spot where she would rub, and it was short, and she'd rubbed her hair out, and then you'd go into her stall in the morning, and she'd put her butt right at the stall door entrance and want you to scratch your butt and go from side to side. And I was like, well, you know, and first it started off as an aesthetic thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she looks really, really horrid with this piece of her tail, you know, missing. How can I get this to? So I went and bought conditioner and all of this stuff, and still it didn't help. The promise that the conditioner it said it would solve, it didn't. And so I shaved half of her dock. I shaved half of her tail up top on the bone off, and she yawned, and I had noticed that she was beginning to eat more food. She was beginning to eat all her dinner. She was coming to work more relaxed. And so, you know, there's all of these things that you know, when horses are, when you have horses that have histories of trouble, that, you know, they sometimes let you know what the problem is. And if we trust it and go and take the hunch, then we can pretty much figure it. I don't know why she didn't want her tail not shaved, but you know, because she was eating, then the ulcers went away and the relaxation happened and all of this stuff. She was drinking more water and she was more comfortable in her body. From a standpoint of all of this, though, whether you're teaching, whether you're training, you know, I think that the most important thing, you know, as a figure and authority in both situations, is that, you know, the goal must always be to be correct as possible, even if you don't win, right? Even if you're not right. And I think that the more if you study, you know, for me, the academic art of riding, you know, taking horses from, you know, the very beginning all the way up to the, you know, Grand Prix and then the high school, like if you up to the Grand Prix standard and then the high school, if the further along you go, the more and more your roles change, right? In the beginning, as a young trainer, you think that the horse is here to serve you and blah 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 blah, but then you understand like there's nothing, horses can't progress if we don't change roles, right? If we don't trust the wisdom that they have inherently in their body and trust how they show us that they feel comfortable and free and happy in a movement, then they won't grow. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that is, and I think that that's a really really important thing for me in my space. So I don't teach very much. I dedicate my time mostly now to training horses so that I can care for them and study them, and when I do teach, pick up on the subtleties of it, because 90% of horse problems when we're riding them comes because, one, we are not breathing, right? And two, because our timing is off. And our timing can't be on if we're not breathing, So so one big problem that a lot of people have is keeping his neck down and their back up, right? And usually when we do that, we are not, usually when the horse is doing that, and when they're inverted and their back is hollow and their neck is up in the sky and our elbows are straight trying to get them to bring their head down, we're not breathing below our rib cage. We're not filling up our lungs, right? And so so we have postures that we are unconscious of, that the horse is responding to, and we're trying to correct the horse, not knowing that the answer is that we're the problem, And so there's all of these things, and a big part of growing in relationship with horses, especially performance horses, who want to do the work, it's an understanding that when they do something wrong, if we don't go to blame them right off the bat, and we really see the process that led up to an undesirable answer, 9 times out of 10 it's us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And a big part of connecting and is the clear communication. And if we're telling them something with our body that's different than the aim that we have in our mind, then we're sending them a double bind message, and all they can do is lock, and then from there we begin to go into sports performance horse injuries, kissing spine, stifle issues, hockey joint stuff. We have all of these things that come about that a lot of competitors, unfortunately, think it just comes with the nature of horses doing demanding work, when it's not. Another part of the connection with as a trainer and rider of horses is varying up the work, making a schedule where they have different things that they do during the week. One, so that they don't lose motivation for the work and tune you out, and two, so that all of the muscle groups in their bodies work and nothing gets overstrained. And so just showing that showing the respect and the love and appreciation that you have for your horse by not harping on the same thing all of the time so they stay motivated, it keeps them interested in you. So I think that's a very important key. So we've done the student, the trainer. So it was the horse and the rider, the trainer and the student, and what else was the third thing that you talked on Friday?
So it went from kind of like the rider to the horse, the rider and the trainer, and then the horse to the rider.
The horse to the rider, so the circle.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing. And so I think that's the thing that's super important. Is that the training process is a collaborative effort. Everybody comes to that situation with the wisdom of their bodies, with the wisdom of their lives, and with everything that the world outside of the work puts on them. I think that it's super, super important in a lesson to ensure that it is a safe space where people or horses or students don't feel like they have to protect themselves from each other. That's a very, very, very important thing, that the space to grow and look foolish and ask questions and make mistakes and make corrections and celebrate progress is that's where it happens, because a positive environment is 90% of the key to positive growth, right? The other 10% is the actual work, but there's just so much hard work that goes in to creating a space in which horses and riders and teachers feel safe working with each other. And if by chance it doesn't work, I think that that's also an important thing to know, that like nobody can be wrong, but they just don't jive, you know?
Right.
And in understanding that, sometimes the best thing you can do is make a referral. Refer them off to somebody else who you may work better for them. In the grand scheme of things, though, and I think that now is a perfect example of that. What is happening in the world affects what we bring to the barn. And, sometimes if a barn is a community of care, which I believe all barns should be, but which most are not, I think that it's important to be able for trainers and students to be able to talk through the parts of life that may be keeping the person unable to connect with their horse in the lesson, to be able to lay the burdens down at the door and leave life outside of the arena. A lot of people don't have those skills to do that by themselves. And so I think that this is where the trust between the teacher and the student is so terribly important. Because if students come into work thinking that they can't talk to their teacher, and then they get on about what's going on in the world, because it's important to understand that when stuff like this happens, like it's a trauma that we all experience, and to be able to talk through that before the lesson begins will save a lot of undue stress and unnecessary correction to the horse.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think that and I think that this is where it's so terribly important for the work in my barn is in service of horses. That's what we do. And like yesterday me and one of my students, we talked about what was going on for almost 45 minutes before the lesson. Right? Because one, I don't want the horse to take on everything that is being brought to the situation, and so we talk. And two, because it's important for students to know how to give voice to problems that they're having. And if they don't have voice, if they don't how to give voice to problems that they're having outside of the saddle and don't have the opportunity to talk through it, to try and put a language to it so that it can be identified and worked through and resolved, then how are we going to do that with them on a horse?
Right.
How are we going to say, this is what the problem is, please tell me what you're feeling? If they can't come to the situation outside of the saddle, not feeling like they will be judged for what they don't know when their feet are on the ground, they will not be able to do that when their feet are in the stirrups.
Yeah.
They just will not. And then it turns into a performance. And the worst thing that anybody can do when they're trying to learn something is to feel like they have to perform and not ever get the answer to the question wrong. These are all things, and it goes the same way for horses. Horses that are afraid to make mistakes because they are punished when they do will explode or break down.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right.
And so when a environment of openness and curiosity and fun, but deep respect for the work and the tradition of the work and the individual practicing that art within that tradition is respected, then connections are made because people feel safe enough to respond and not react. That is the biggest inhibitor to any relationship, be horse or people. Being reactionary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, this, so this is kind of the space that I work in. This is how horses and people heal in my barn.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's awesome.
it's the intention that I have for this space.
Right.
And
you
it's
said that clear.
understanding. Yeah, and it's understanding that if the work is to be correct, then love must be the constant. It must be the only constant. From mucking the stalls in the morning to doing the work in the afternoon. It all must come from the heart. To where every being involved feels safe being who they are in the most useful expression possible. And understanding that in coming to this space, to build on the parts of the work that are affirming and life-giving, then we begin to get brilliant work. Then we begin to get everything that is prized in the show ring naturally. Because horses and riders feel good in their bodies and minds enough to give it to each other.
Yeah.
And like that's in the grand scheme of things, that is what an ideal partnership between a horse and rider is. That they feel safe enough to take risk because they know that they're safe in each other's care. And that starts before the riding lesson. It starts in being super particular of the quality of hay they eat. It's understanding that if a horse doesn't feel comfortable with a certain farrier, you find another one that they feel comfortable with.
Right.
It's them knowing that they can trust you to hear them when they speak. Because horses really only have 2 volumes. they have really quiet or really loud,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
if we can keep them in that really quiet space, if we can keep them in that really quiet space and mold their bodies in such a way that the work with you becomes a reward because they just feel good,
Mm-hmm.
then if training that horse for somebody else, the person, the owner of this horse, relaxes because they begin to know that this is what their horse should feel like in the work.
Right.
And when the horse comes to the work with a quiet mind, they give you a body. When they give you their bodies, you have all this power to sculpt. And our job is to stay open enough in our mind by following our breath, by seeing where we're tight, and seeing what that tightness is symbolic of. What emotion is this representing?
Right.
Or excuse? Right?
Yeah, that too.
And yes, and having the courage to call it what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And making people and growing people, human beings, by teaching them the process of identifying uncomfortable situations and teaching them effective ways to work through it and not diminish the quality of the work or expectation that I put on them. This is how we make good riders. This is how we keep horses sound and make good horses. But this is also how we contribute to the healing of the world, because we are helping people understand that, you know, freedom is choosing what you want to be responsible for.
Yeah.
If your horse is a total shit show, what you bring to that situation, you're choosing to be responsible for. That, you know, and which is what the horse is using as information for what he or she thinks you're asking him to do, him or her to do.
Yeah.
Right? If you bring chaos, you're going to get chaos.
Yeah.
If you bring peace, it will eventually come, because that is the true nature of horses.
Yeah.
Peace is the true nature of horses.
We have a question.
Yay! Hallelujah! What? Okay.
Okay. How can you maintain the partnership if your time is limited with your horse?
You can maintain the partnership if your time is limited with your horse. I would say that one of the biggest things would be, what is the goal of the partnership, right? What is the partnership built on? What are the goals for the relationship with this horse? I think one, being as consistent with what you bring to the table as possible. I think what I found, and I'm sure that people will agree, but not using horses as something that you dump all of your unprocessed emotional baggage on.
Yeah.
Because there are studies that have been shown that, you know, and signs and symptoms of horses suffering post-traumatic stress disorder, just like people. You know, I mean, and so for horses in therapeutic riding situations, which is what a lot, you know, even though people, a lot of people aren't in therapeutic riding programs, that's what horses are, right? It's making sure. I think that you don't offer anything emotionally to your horse that you can't hold and process before you give it to them, because we do, and depending on the temperament of the horse, sometimes that is, if they expect that from you all of the time, that then the work will suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think that that's an awareness, that I think that that's the awareness for me, that's really important. Like if it's a performance goal, put them in work with a trainer who understands and teaches from a pedagogy that you agree with, that is safe for you, right? If your time is limited, make sure that your horse is being taught in a way that you can understand first and then do second.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. If you can't understand the trainer, how do you get the result that they're asking?
Right, and then you have what 90% of the performance horse industry being. You have these really wonderful horses that the trainers can ride, but the owners can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have another.
And I mean, yeah.
So we had a poll going on at the beginning, right before we got started. The question was, when do you feel the most connected with your horse? The options were on the ground, in the saddle, during grooming, or we don't have much of a connection. So we had equal amounts of people feeling a connection with their horse in the saddle and during grooming. But as far as groundwork, there were not very many people that felt connected with their horse on the ground. So how do we get that translation, that connection on the ground, also in the saddle, or vice versa?
So, the work from the ground is a study of the hands, right? And so, and the work of the hands is the art of sculpting a horse's mouth, right? And so, and I think one, groundwork is important and is a worthy, because it's a worthy endeavor, because there was a study that was done in Germany that by default found that horses who did groundwork and were educated from the ground first went into the work under saddle with a lower heart rate. Their stress levels were lower. So I think one, that for me is one thing. Two, the ground is where you earn your horse's trust. That's where they see how you respond in a scary situation. And if we go back to Branderup's epilogue, it says, my horse is my mirror, which shows my good and my bad moods unmodified. Right? And so if the wind blows when you're walking past the door by the arena and your horse jumps but you don't respond and you keep on with the work, your horse will learn that, hey, they didn't respond when I was in a scary situation, and so then I know that I'm safe with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I would say that groundwork is, I would say that, I differentiate, because I'm a nerd, between groundwork and work from the ground. So I think that groundwork is like round pinned work. It's like the join up stuff. But then the work from the ground is like long reining, where your horse can do the, you're doing the long reins, you're teaching piaffe passage, you're working the horse's understanding by teaching them where and how to isolate their bodies when you're not in the saddle.
Yeah.
This is where the voice comes in, and understanding the tones that make your horse hot or make them calm. The study of a horse from the ground is the study of the horse's heart, of their emotional self. because you get to observe how the environment affects them. And then you get to observe how, when the environment affects them adversely, how you can teach them in a more effective way or a less effective way to respond to an unwanted stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So that's for me, that's the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I take and I do, and you know, and even with groundwork, you know, my personal horses, they have a day of long grain work where they do their dressage from the ground, and then they jump from the ground, and then they have a day of lunging, or they'll long line around the hills of my farm, and then they have a day of trick training with pedestal work. Does also work on the ground, which for like rescue horses or horses that are super skittish, you know, it's all just relationship building.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's the purpose. You know, like I said, when we kind of move our ideas of training, you know, around of what the horse can do for me, and kind of say, what can I do to make the horse feel more comfortable in my presence, then the possibilities for training open up.
Right.
And you realize that there's a whole body of literature and practice in like trick training and circus work, which is incredible for horses' confidence.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so, like, currently right now, my personal horses, my mare's not interested in the least, but my geldings, like, I have a roundabout around the arena in my building or on the farm where trailers can go in and out. And so the challenge this last week was to teach them that we've been working on the target training. And so now they can walk around the road. They can walk around the road outside with no lead rope or halter.
Wow.
Yeah, with the ground and the grass and all of this stuff. And so, you know, it's all of this, it's them knowing that, you know, in a situation like this, in a situation where we're not confined to the safety of the school, like I can still be calm and relaxed.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, changing up the environment.
Yeah, change up the environment, but also making sure that even in the change of environment, that you're a steady point of reference for calm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that's what groundwork is. You know, that's where groundwork is super, super important. And two, and like rehabbing horses, like it's really important for horses to know how to do groundwork, because like if they have injuries, and part of that injury, you know, rehab program is before you are able to ride them, you have to lunge them. It's really important to not just use as a tool to tire your horse out before you ride.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's always preparing them. It's always you know, it's a practice and preparation for if things aren't perfect and they do get hurt or you get hurt, you can still work them and continue to progress in the work.
Right. So we
you know?
yeah. We have a few minutes left. Is there anyone that wants to unmute themselves and ask any questions? Vanessa says, thank you. That so resonates. I've been riding horses less and took everything back to the ground. It's changed everything in our relationship. That's awesome, Vanessa.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions or complaints?
Complaints about their horses?
Or me? I don't know.
No.
I mean, I just want to make sure that I was clear.
Yeah.
No, I think that the most important thing to understand for me is that, you know, one of the most effective ways to be a safe space for your horse is to take care of your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Do the work to take care of your heart.
Yeah.
You know, have a practice, an exercise regimen, a meditation regimen, yoga, you know, something something that allows you to free yourself from the weight of life sometimes.
Mm-hmm. We do
You
have,
know?
yeah. Avery says, what's an exercise that you would recommend everyone do with their horse?
What would be the goal?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the goal for that would be. I don't know. I mean, that's a big question. What I would say is just one, you know, a big part of horses being willing to work with you is making sure that they're comfortable in the work. So making sure that the tack fits. If you have a young horse, you know, making sure, because their heads grow, making sure that the bridle is adjusted accordingly and the bit isn't too small. If you have an older horse, understanding the structural changes that happen in the mouth as they get older with their teeth, making sure that the bit is still comfortable. You know, these are things that, you know, that will help things get better. The care that you give in preparation will help the care that you give in the preparation will really help the quality of the work once it's time to work, right? It's like a transition, like a good transition from, or a good transition from trot to canter is always in the preparation of the canter from the trot. Like if you just push your horse into trot or into canter from the trot, you throw it on the forehand, the collection will be lost, and then we start doing damage to the body. So it's in the preparation for whatever we want that usually gives us a really good leg up on whether or not it's successful.
Right. That's understandable. It's all about your.
It's education. It's education.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's education. It's education, and this is why the classical systems of schooling a horse work, because there's the first, second, and third grade, you know, all the way up to postgraduate work, right? Like you have the training level to Grand Prix, then you have the airs above the ground, and you can't reach one without going to the other. And if you try, then the holes of what you skipped will begin to show up because the horse's body is not prepared. Right. And when their body is not prepared, their minds shut down.
Mm-hmm.
Time is your friend. That's the exercise that you can do. Take time. Yeah. Take the time that it takes.
Mm-hmm. And listen.
Don't be greedy.
Yeah.
You know?
Someone said, and listen.
Huh?
Someone said, and listen. Take the time and listen.
Take the time and listen. And so that's what I said, you know, and I think that's the thing. Like, you know, love builds up. And to build up something, you have to listen to what it needs. Mm-hmm. You have to understand, you know, in the impartation of the information that you're trying to get the horse to comprehend, you have to understand how what you're asking the horse to do makes them feel. Mm-hmm. Because that is how horses go through the world. They go through the world feelingly. You know? They're not intellectual creatures. In that way, in that regard, they're not intelligent. But in matters of the heart and trusting what they feel and responding or reacting out of that space, depending on whether they feel safe or not, they are genius. And that's where the lesson that they have to teach us comes from. If we can learn how to trust what we feel, and if we can learn how to respond without doubting ourselves, mm-hmm. right, in a way that is effective, then we begin to understand the language of horses, and then we begin to connect with them clearly, because our motivation is peace and not ego.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, the second question was one of my questions, but I will just give you a scenario that kind of was surrounding my question. Yesterday,
Yeah.
Caitlin and I went downtown to the Black Lives Matter, or the George Floyd protests in our hometown. And it was funny to me because I know my horse, but the arrow on the ground that tells you to turn right or to turn left became a horse eating arrow. And the crosswalk, was gonna swallow him. So so I got off and just walked us and walked us through it. And he's like, oh, here we go. That was great. It's all fine. It's great now. And we stood in a crowd of a ton of people, and it was just like some people walked past us and were startled like 3/4 of the way past us because they didn't even know the horses were there. That's how quiet they were standing, which was fantastic. But I feel like that my relationship with my horse on the ground is so much better than when I'm in the saddle. So I know that that's a challenge for me.
Yeah, and that's because you trust your body you trust your body more when your feet are on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think that that's a scenario that all of us until our practice, until we trust our bodies enough to hold us when we're in the saddle. I think that that's the it's natural enough for you not to have to think about what you're doing when your feet are on the floor.
Right.
And the challenge with riding is that we try to use our brains to figure out what we're supposed to be doing with our bodies, instead of using our bodies to just try and figure out the process. Because every riding problem that riders face is always one of position, and position problems are always predicated by thought. This is where I think I should be, and I can't breathe here, and I must have my elbows in and my butt out and my stomach in, and blah, 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 blah. And when we do that in our head and we have this perfect ideal that we're riding towards, our bodies move.
Mm-hmm.
And when our bodies don't move, our horses lock up and they resist.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the language of horses, is biomechanics, correct movement and energy.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not allowing, I mean, it's kind of like that common misconception that when you're riding your horse, you're supposed to pull your stomach in and chuck your seat bones forward, and then you do like little lower ab crunches every time your horse moves. And the horses that are ridden like that, oftentimes at anything faster than a walk, oftentimes will not relax their back. They oftentimes can't go on a longer rein. They oftentimes don't come through because the seat must move. Well, the seat bones must move up one at a time, up and down one at a time, with the horse's hind legs coming under when the horse's hind leg is under their body. So when their hind leg is under your body, it pushes your hip up, and like in the walk, it gives you this really, really, really like cool figure 8 feeling. And when you're trotting, it's like you're jogging, and when you're cantering, you're like skipping, depending on the lead that you're on. But there's just like that common misconception that like a good seat means you shove both seat bones down into their back and push. Mm-hmm. Like that's and so and I think that more than anything is and then so if you push with the hands, then the second thing you begin to do is pull. Or if you push with the seat, the second thing you can begin to do is pull with the hands, right? And then and so I think that that's another thing is proper rider education. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of problems that can be fixed in a relationship between a person and their horse, with the rider understanding just, what they're supposed to do. And this goes back to the effectiveness of the teacher, mm-hmm. right? It's understanding that, like, if you close your toes, your hip flexors lock. If your hip flexors lock, your horse is usually stuck in the base of the neck and won't lower their necks down. Mm-hmm. It's these kinds of things that are well documented in the literature that people just need to make the time to read, you know. And I think that you know, kind of like all of this stuff going on in you know I'm going to rephrase that. Knowledge will overcome the fear. When you know how to respond effectively, you're not afraid of not knowing what to do.
Right.
And as you practice that more and more and more, it becomes second nature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that that's the thing, is that the, you know, and like the way that you responded to your horse going through the crosswalk was super, super good, because like it let you know that you built this relationship in a way that if he can't find the answer in the way that you're asking, you can backtrack and make sure that and explain to him what you're trying to get him to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which goes back to that study, right? When they're introduced to new information from the ground, their stress levels go down.
Yeah. Yeah. It was funny.
You know?
Towards the end, we were headed back. And once we got out of the crowd, I was like, all right, I'm going to hop back on him. So we went under this little building thing where there was a spot where I could stand on it and kind of get closer to the saddle. And, as I was getting into the saddle, he starts to climb up onto the block that I was standing on. And I was like, wait, no, no, I understand you think this is what I want, but please stop. He's like,
yeah.
I want you to get up here. You want, you know, oh, we're climbing up here right now? Okay. I'm like, no.
So then my question to you is, how did you develop that relationship where you understood that your horse was trying to offer you something and you were able to respond in such a way that you were able to say, no, I know this is what you want, but not now, without punishment? How did you get there?
I tell everybody since I've had him since he was 6 months old, we spent the first 2.5, 3 years of his life doing stuff on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Anything I ask him to do, if I'm on the ground, he will do it.
Yeah.
Period.
So you built that relationship.
Yes. I mean, we've gone through, you know, ditches and gorges and rivers and stuff. Well, I didn't always get off, but I know that if I'm on the ground, he will do it. So I think he thought, you know, oh, this is another, you know, she got me over this white thing on the ground. Oh, now we're gonna climb up on here, and he was just
it's
like,
safe. Yeah.
And
he was following your lead, and so like that exemplified that if you would have told this story in the beginning, I would have had nothing to say, because that's the purpose of this. You develop a relationship in such a way that your horse feels safe enough to ask you questions. And not only ask you questions, but offer you something, because, you know, they know when they try something new, if it's what they want, they get rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
And it's giving them that space to try. And that's what makes successful horses. That is the key to making any horse possible. You teach them how to try.
Mm-hmm.
And as a teacher, that is the key to making riders better. You teach them that it is safe to try. And just like I said, hey, I know this is what you think I want, but I don't want this. Come back here. Mm-hmm. That's what a teacher of people must do. I know this is how you think you're supposed to ask for this, but when you do this, how does it make your horse respond? If it's not how you want the horse to respond, what else do you think we can do?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, and and just like you have that relationship with your horse, it's important for teachers to feel. It's important for teachers to create the space for their students to feel comfortable enough to engage in the creation of that kind of relationship between the two of them.
Yeah.
That is the key to progress. And will everybody reach Grand Prix? No, that's not everybody's goal. You know, but you know, they will be safe and successful in trying new things, which is important. Whether it's the crosswalk or a new show ring, you know, like that's the goal of the work.
Yeah.
It's not to do anything, to be, right? It's to be. And I think that, so the person who asked how can they make their relationships successful with their horse when they have limited time, be in your body when you're with your horse, right? Don't go in thinking you're do this and that and this and that, because then that totally diminishes the possibility of your horse saying, you know what, like today my back hurts and I would much rather just hang out. And they do when they have the room, you know? So, you know, but that, you know, I could go on for days. I could go on for days.
I know, and I love listening.
Because I love it so much. I love it so much. I love it with all of my heart, because I know that when it's practiced with devotion, it heals every hurt that life can throw at you. This relationship that we build with our horses.
Yeah.
And to be able to love something that deeply is the most precious gift in the world. You know?
That is the truth. Yes. Yes.
So I really appreciate it, but I think we're running out of time.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, if you want to let people know where they could get in contact with you, if they have any follow-up questions.
Yes, and so a horsemanship page that on Facebook, Nahshon Cook Horsemanship, where you can message me. My telephone number is there. It'll take me a few days usually to respond, because I like to read and think about stuff and make sure that I give an answer that's sufficient. But I have a ton of resources that I can suggest about everything that I've talked about, from rider mechanics to liberty work to work on the ground and the different traditions they're in. You know, because, you know, I mean, building a healthy horse is a really worthy endeavor. You know?
Yeah.
It's a really worthy one. So, that's where people can get in touch with me, and I would be happy to help in any way that I can. You know, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And big thanks to everybody who came today, who's been with us for the last 3 days. I hope that you gathered something from this entire experience. I know I have. Thank you for tuning in to Young Black Equestrians, the podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player, as well as over on YouTube. And you know what? Do me a favor, leave a review over on Apple Podcasts. Doing that makes it so that this platform and this content gets shared with Black equestrians all over the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and I will see you next time.